doing a project with the University of Anchorage Music Department, and I'm working with stage fright with their voice students, which surprisingly, I mean, they're in college studying voice, and still one of the biggest things that they think of is stage fright. And this kind of just reminds me of something that I've got in that program of just the realization that that music starts in consciousness. It starts in the divine. Skookums feels the energy coming in and she just plays and riffs. I don't think you put a lot of, you just kind of go with the flow, it seems like, of what's showing up. And through her skills and her study and her gifts, it's like the infinite love of the universe, God's infinite love, is being made manifest in this room, and we get to receive it. And it's just like a beautiful thing. And I know we're going to be talking about unity, and I love when Kaleem comes and speaks to us, because your messages are, they just land so softly in my heart, and they resonate with the truth as I see it. But it's just such a beautiful expression of all of that. So before I get emotional and start gushing all over the place, let me welcome our brother Kaleem to the stage to share a message about inauguration.
The inaugural, right?
And our dreams. And an opportunity to kind of what we're going through
tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Barbara.
Welcome, Kaleem.
Yeah, appreciate you. And welcome everyone, and thank you. Okay, for allowing me again to come back to my family, right?
Absolutely.
And to share. And it's so fun when you hear people describe you, right? That's in high order. I got to step up tonight. And it's also gratifying to hear that oneness, because that is really a major theme of my life. It's about oneness. And it's hard, and I try to gear away from that sometimes, and it makes my story up, but it's always about the one. Good. And yes, today our topic is the inauguration, or the inaugural, and the dream. And of course, it's because of the convergence of both the inauguration ceremony we're about to experience tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern Time, and the celebration, of course, of the Martin Luther King Jr. birthday. Happen to converge on the same day. How interesting.
That's very interesting. Has that happened before?
Yes, it happened about 3 times before.
Okay.
I guess Ronald Reagan also, I understand,
Okay.
in that time period. All right. And so, and it must have been his second inauguration, because he was the one who actually signed it into law. Right? And so, and of course, since you already know why we're here at Adams, right? Not just really about the outer picture, the physical expression. It's always about the inner expression. So what does this mean to us? And you mentioned, talked about Adam and where maybe your new iteration may be. Well, I recall, it seemed like to me back in the 1970s, it seemed like Adams Center was on Fireweed, if I'm correct, or someplace in Midtown. And of course, me being a lover of books, and they'd have all these wonderful books that I used to go there and just, speaking of energy, right? And then of course they moved around a couple of times. The last time, of course, was on with Raspberry, I think prior to this location. And that is the key, though. It's really about not the location, the physical location. It's really about the energy, about the consciousness, and that's really kind of where I guess what we always talk about, right? What we're always talking about is our consciousness. And of course, whenever I have a topic, I'll often get titles before I get content. And it's so fun, right? It's okay, come on, where's the content, right? Because Dawn knows when she books me, she'll ask me, and she'll say, has the news spoke to you yet, Kaleem? But the news is speaking all night. Right? And so even in the last few days, it begins to shift. The inauguration and the dream. And of course, as part of the preparation, I take a deep dive into the history part of it. I try to avoid it, because that's just intellectual stuff, right? But I did find it interesting when I began to look at the time it took for us to culminate the Constitution that we now have today. And I just kind of looked at the time frame. I realized that we had the Declaration of Independence. And before I get into history of that as well, it's important to me, and I recall a couple of years ago when I spoke here, someone came in after me and said, but Kaleem, you didn't include all the other things that were going on during that time period. We were able to talk about historical things I was talking about, because we do know we only have 30 or so minutes, right? And whenever something linear is happening, all kinds of things happen around that. And oftentimes when we talk about the glory of history, and we highlight the light of history, we often forget about the darkness that also happened in that same time period. There are people pontificating about democracy and freedom, while others were enslavement. And the very fathers who would talk about freedom were also enslavers. So I also want to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge how we celebrate this wonderful land we're in today. Okay, and I want to also acknowledge, of course, those who came before us, 10,000 or more, whatever the estimation is, right? The beautiful land we stand upon. And we're speaking about consciousness. I also recognize that as we begin to study history and its details, how amazing, miraculous it is that we can see human consciousness developing thousands of years ago, when we did not have cell phone, we did not have the internet, but we had the spiritual net, collective consciousness. And there was some type of something happening on every continent and every culture, as though someone planned it, right? And so we always have some type of avatar or Christ figure. It's always rising up, and it's always evident. So when I was doing the research on our inauguration, of course, I took that deep dive, and I realized that much of our inauguration, the founding fathers, because the mamas weren't at the table.
That's for sure.
Right. Many of them were influenced by the Age of Enlightenment during that time period, and Freemasonry, and other, today we would call New Thought type thinking. It wasn't really, unlike what's popular, it wasn't really traditional fundamentalist Christianity that established our nation. It was heavily influenced. Where did that come from? Well, it was heavily influenced by Greek and Roman Greek philosophy, all right? And of course, and there was many, during the Age of Enlightenment, what they borrowed from the Roman and Greek and Plato and et cetera, and Socrates. And where were they influenced from? Because we can go back to ancient Egypt, all right? And we can keep going back to Nubia, which is a sub-Saharan African culture, who was heavily integrated on the Nile River and having a mutual exchange of culture and warfare technology and government technology exchanging. And as will often happen in history, they would conquer each other, take over, right? And it goes back and forth. So if we can keep going back, and we find out there's this one thing happening. And what is this one thing happening to me? Well, I often realize that why are we as human beings, I feel, we're a unique and special part of creation. We are more than just mineral, even though our bodies are made up of mineral life. We are more than plant life. Plant life has senses, of course. It can follow the sun and it can react to the environment, whereas minerals appear not to, except to, of course, radiation and heat or something. But plants, they can even move based upon sensations, more than animal life. Primarily, we think, which I question that because I have a pet, only by instinct. But it seems to me when I talk to my pet, it kind of has some understanding with me. As many of you have pets, and I imagine you might experience something similar. Okay, but we seem to have something that's called self-awareness or self-knowledge of self. And we seem to be a little more adaptable when it comes to creativity. So we seem to have something special. And I'm going to pull up on a story. Just coming to me, Bobby. Okay? Because I grew up in Christianity, so that's kind of a template, even though I'm not married to Christianity, because as you just indicated, Christianity is a story, but there are infinite stories that are so similar based on the same principles. And so so as I was talking about it, I'm getting about the inaugural, believe it or not, right? Right. So as we're talking about the inaugural, to me, the inaugural represents a transfer of power from one stage to another. Transfer of power. And of course, based upon on our philosophy, I should say our so-called national philosophy, it's supposed to be a transfer of power from we the people to a representative government, which means we supposedly elect representatives to go to Congress to represent us. And therefore, it's not a true democracy, which we don't have direct input into the national laws, but they supposedly represent us. And also part of the founding fathers, as they began to extract through the age of enlightenment and the history of human development and political development from ancient wisdom, they realized how important it was not to have it all in one person's hand. Therefore, we had the so-called separation of powers. So we wanted to have someone to execute, right, our intentions, but we no longer wanted to have a king who had all the power. And particularly when that king also had not only the political power, but also had the divine power, in which they were so-called speaking for the gods or for the God as well. So we didn't want all that, okay? And so then what would happen though, and if we study the history, so I began to say, well, part of the primary reason why I like to study what's called ancient history is someone told me that it's the same thing was happening 10,000 years ago as happening today, 10,000 moments ago.
Ooh.
And if you study ancient history, you might kind of see more of the primary, the raw nature of what was happening. Therefore, because it seems in modern culture, it's so complicated, so complex, and which is kind of a good thing. It's like a bowl of spaghetti, right? It's hard to figure where one end begins and one ends. Where does this all come from? Well, they say if you study ancient history, you might have an opportunity to see it in a more pure sense. So I did that, right? That's why I took that deep dive all the way back to Africa. Right? But also, then I said, well, how about in terms of spirituality, religion? And so, of course, the same thing happened is that in all the world cultures and philosophies, there was some avatar, some enlightened being that came up, and they began to be the God, whether they wanted it or not. They began to be worshipped. And then at some point, the people kind of rose up and tried to tackle that power. And why was all that going on? We call it revolutions, right? Constantly. Then, of course, once we get rid of one king, we recreate another one, because for some reason we like these gods, right? Okay. And so all this is going on swirling in my head. So finally I came down to, okay, let me use Christianity then. I'm very familiar with that as a template to think about this thing called power. And inauguration. Inauguration from our particular culture, inauguration I found that came from the Roman Greek time period. The augur was the priest. And we're about to crown or ordain a leader. They called for the priest, the augur, to have a divination or divine understanding of what was going on. And is this a good time to have this inauguration? So they would look at nature. They would look at the flight of birds. And they would read the birds or, whatever the interpretation. They say, now's a good time or not a good time, or this is a good person, not a good person. Okay? That's kind of isn't it interesting, where our inauguration came from. So once again, I'm taking this deep dive. Let's go back, though, more than that. I realize, according to the Christian story, the Hebrew story, because I call Christianity, meaning that, Christianity, of course, came from the person of Jesus, and we forget Jesus happened to be a Jew, all right, and therefore the Hebrew history is a very important part of this whole story, the Abrahamic story. And then they have a story. It says, in the beginning, God. And then they have a story about the creation of mankind. And they began to have this, first of all, the creation of life. They talk about the parting of the waters and the light and etc. Then, and one of the stories, even though there's two major stories about creation, but one of the stories in Genesis talked about a 7-day period of creation. And all of creation was made up until the 6th day. And then now here's where the problem comes in at. This one God said, let us, oh wow, you messed up there, right? Anyway, let us make man in our image and likeness. And of course, we do know in metaphysical determination, let us make humankind in our image and likeness. And then in this part of the story, and this particularly comes up in second Genesis, they formed him from the dust, the body from the dust of the earth, and breathed into it the breath of life. First inauguration, transfer of power from the divine, the universal, to a particular. And so it happens every single day. Our babies are born, and they take that first inauguration. From the people, in our context, we endow a person to represent us, represent us. The infinite breathe into us from this infinite universal into you and I as particulars in its likeness to represent itself. So here we are walking around representatives, representations in the likeness of the infinite, the divine. We are it. There is no other. Even if we believe, but I believe, that there has to be this one infinite, and my mind can't contain how this one infinite created itself or came from someplace, but I believe that it is now. And then from this one infinite, we have all of this, you and I. So there's nothing that could have created anything from it except from itself. So here we are now in 2025 tomorrow, going through an inauguration process. And that's why we still include, because of the ancient Freemasonry and other Enlightenment age, we still have someone with a Bible or ancient scripture we still use. The divine influence. We still take an oath, supposedly to represent in the particular, the general overall good. And in the Bible, at the end of the creation, God, as it was creating animals and trees and plants and etc., the infinite said, this is good. But on the 7th day, it looked back after creating mankind. See, on the 6th day, when it created mankind, it said, this is very good. So I'm saying all this to say this. Inauguration is an important ceremony. And particularly you and I, we happen to be in a nature and a culture in which we're saying they're supposed to represent us. That we as gods have to remain engaged to make sure this stays in divine alignment. And it depends upon you and I. And we would hope that rather than having, like we've done throughout mankind, having constant violent revolutions trying to regain the power of the people, we propose to have a peaceful transfer of power. So that's an ideal. So let's talk about today the ideal. And let's talk about the ideal of what they were trying to do back in 1789. Okay, because that was very interesting. I realized that we became a nation in terms of a revolution, all right, in 1776. And it took all that time period, some 13 years later, before we culminated to what we have today as the Constitution, the basic Constitution, even though we also know, of course, it's been amended a number of times. So So the transfer of power really is a divine experience and represents a divine nature of us. And we're recognizing that from the collective, we endow a particular to represent us. And I would then ask you and I to remember that you are part of the inauguration of humanity. And that each one of us can take on consciously the honor of being a representative of the infinite. But it's an honor, it's a consciousness. And once we take that on consciously, and this is part of what we call our spiritual quest, right? Then what happens, of course, that we have now a co-responsibility to do good for the collective. So I always look at, these wonderful things are so wonderful. Talk about these theories, these philosophies. Then how do I live it in my personal life? How do I live it in my personal life? So I'd like to share a couple things that I imagine we're all somewhat familiar with. And I took the preamble of the Constitution. Then I looked back and read about, since tomorrow's Martin Luther King's birthday as well, he proposed that we co-create a beloved community. And then when I looked at what his proposal was for beloved community, it was in perfect alignment to we the people coming together to create a more perfect union for the overall benefit of all. So they also were creating a beloved community was the intention. And then some 150 years later, then a great man spoke from the DC, right, in DC, and called forth this to remind us to get realigned with those original intentions. And this is something like we have the inauguration process, the president every so many years, how important that we re-inaugurate ourselves periodically to remind us of the awesome responsibility that we have as evolving consciousness beings to continue to evolve and to accept the power we have been given by the infinite that we represent, and our responsibility to, because creating this beloved community or creating this more perfect union is a process. It really isn't a destination, it's a process. And someone has to take on the responsibility every now and then to renew the process and to remind us to realign. Of course, so therefore I looked at the history of the Hebrews and how they had these many gods. And they finally ended up with one God. They had many names, Yahweh, Elohim, and it went on and on and on. And then one came forth and they said, well, and this God, they ain't not been this one God. This God, in my estimation, had kind of like an emotional problem. This God was loving, heavenly, and it was hellish. Okay, it was punishing. It was cruel. And then when I get out of Sunday school thinking, when I realized, that whole journey to the promised land, if you read the Bible and the details of how that happened, it was not a Sunday school story. When they went to the promised land, their interpretation of God told them to slaughter every man, woman, and child, and cattle, every living thing, to enter the promised land. We were definitely at what's called an animalistic nature as part of that story. That's kind of things we kind of cover up, right? We look at the glory of the story. Then there came a man who said, these laws that we're standing on from ancient history is wonderful. But then he said, we need to go to the next level, a new inauguration. He came up with a loving God. This God was so intimate and so loving, he called it the Father. Matter of fact, in Aramaic, they say it really wasn't the Father as we use today. In Aramaic, they say the term was really Papa. An intimate family relationship with God. And part of his message was, and part of the message of Jesus was when he was in prayer and praying for his followers, he made a statement that with something like this, as soon as I find my note here, okay, that may they be at one as I am at one, as we are at one. So he was having this prayerful conversation with his Father. May the people that I'm serving be at one as I am at one with you and they with us. Bobby is about the oneness. Okay, all right? Because, and also he said there was a greater commandment, because the wonderful Hebrews gave, saying that you should love God and dedicate yourself to God. And he said, I give you a new commandment, to love God with your whole being and to love your neighbor as yourself. Oneness. So if we go to the point where we're no longer seeing ourselves as separate beings because of the appearance or the experience, we get back to the oneness, we're proposing that would then trigger this thing called love. And love to me is, one of my friends taught me, is more than a noun, it's a verb. Love means I'm caring, I care, and I nurture. So love your neighbor, care for your neighbor as you care for yourself. And as you so-called say you care for God. So Jesus also made a statement saying, the glory which you have given me, and of course he's in this conversation between him and his Father, his God, his Papa, okay? May I have also given to them, so that they may be one, just as we are one. So what is this glory that Jesus said that the Father has given to him, that he wants to give it to others, right? Well, when I looked more deeply into it, the glory was about light. Light is about energy. Energy is about power. He inaugurated, when he had to develop an intimate relationship with God, with his understanding, he was empowered. And once he was empowered, he wanted now to share this power with others. Once again, this oneness. And he says that so that they may be one, just as we are one. We, the people, form a more perfect union to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and provide for the common good. I kind of wrapped up that with all the phrases. To provide for the defense and the welfare, etc., for the common good. Isn't that a beloved community? Isn't that a beautiful statement? I also get, and then then Martin Luther King's statement about the beloved community was, he said, let us create this beloved community where we all live together in harmony, honoring the dignity and worth of all. Isn't that what the Constitution says? The dignity and the worth of all. And we realized that was a limited thinking who all was. Okay?
Exactly.
All right. But just as Jesus stood on what he inherited and he expanded that, let us stand upon what we inherited. And I know this is what we're here. This is what we do here. Okay. Let's continue to expand that. And as we continue to expand this concept of this oneness, and we take on the inauguration personally, the power that was breathed into us in the beginning. And again, remember, it's more than the physical breath, it's the consciousness breath that you breathe into each other all the time when we come together to meditate. We breathe all the time together as I listen to you speak and you share your life energies. And Bobby's, I can't say Bob, and Bobby's wonderful voice and the vibration of his energy. We're breathing into each other collectively, this wonderful consciousness energy. And what happens, of course, as we continue to do this, we will continue to create what's called a chain reaction of good. A chain reaction of good. Because we do know, as Bobby was saying, that when you step into a room and you can feel the collective consciousness of what happened in that room before you stepped in. Well, we can step into a room in which we're bringing the light. We are the light of the world. We are the energy of the world. We are the power of the world. And we have individual and collective power to continue to evolve humanity to higher and higher levels of consciousness. So I would say then the inauguration means a lot more to me than simply a transfer of political power. It reminds me that this is really an ancient ceremony, but the power of, but the awareness of the transfer of that infinite power in and as each one of us. And because we have this power, we have the collective ability to co-create our life experiences. And not only to call it good, but to call it very good. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your time and attention, and for the opportunity to share. Peace and blessings.
I have a question. So we talk about the oneness, and then if we look at when Christ threw the money changers out of the temple, I'm assuming he didn't feel like he was one with them. I'm thinking there was some differentiation there. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about that?
Ah, good. Talk came with me a couple weeks ago. I took a deep dive into that. Okay, and I did notice that he now, and I read the scriptures in detail and different interpretation of that, right? But noticed, I noticed, became aware of the fact he never touched a human being. He threw them out the temple. He used because they said he used the whip,
yeah,
but he did not touch a human being. Okay, he did not touch a human being so what happens though, as a shepherd, and of course, and I'll pull up on another because it came up in a topic about raising children, right? Do not spare the rod. Well, Jesus did not spare the rod. So what he was doing, now the rod means I'm a shepherd. A shepherd does not beat the sheep with the rod. He guides them. So that temple experience was really a guidance. What you're doing in this holy ground, this holy space is wrong. And I'm going to make it a point to say this is wrong. And to me, this kind of feeds upon the intention of my talk, is how we have responsibility to throw the money changers out of the temple through guidance. And yet sometimes we have to be affirmative when we do that, okay? But do not harm another individual, intentionally, of course. Right?
So then the one with is not that you are, that you are, the one with has to do with the harm.
Well, yes, and also here's what one with me means to be as well. One means I'm acknowledging that we're also evolving consciousness. And part of who I am is mineral consciousness. I'm just saying here, duh, and whatever happens, let it happen. Part of me is vegetation consciousness. Well, I kind of sense something's going on. I'm moving, but I'm not doing anything about it. And then part of me is animal consciousness. I strike out because I feel fear and I want to survive. I want to protect my babies. Right? That's all part of it. See, and to me, this metaphor is all part of human consciousness, right? So part of Jesus was a human being, right? And so part of his human nature was he came off that highfalutin consciousness, and oh no, this is not going to happen here. So I still say it, because why? The same consciousness that's in the worst of us is also in the best of us. So in my estimate, he was still at one with them. He was recognizing we have to evolve from this. Okay, and this is my way of making a point. And I don't want to insult anybody, but to me, Jesus was a man of high consciousness. The story of Jesus, and he was a human being. Okay, and there's many stories that show he wasn't some Superman, right? As we make our superheroes are today, right? Well, we made him a superhero because of the story. This is a natural human consequence. It's like we tell the story of the great founding fathers and how wonderful it was to democracy. There was hell going on also. And there was light going on. Okay, I'm sorry. To answer your question? Or respond to your question? Okay, thank you.
No, go ahead, Laura. Oh, thank you. When you were talking, the whole founding fathers thing, just my It's like, yeah, it was all white men creating this,
Rich white men.
exactly, creating this thing, and not women, not any minorities.
Mhm.
It's like, it took us so long, and it's still not really happening, of us all being equal in this country. I don't know my point, but it just.
We're evolving. All I can tell you this. I'm sorry, those who heard me talk before, I tell the same story over again. Things are better and getting better. They are not what they used to be.
True.
Okay. All right. And part of my story is my father was born on a plantation. My father was born in 1907 in a plantation in Louisiana.
Wow.
Okay. He moved to Port Arthur, Texas, in the Gulf Coast, worked in a hotel. He can go in the back door, but cannot come in the front door or rent a room. His son, Kaleem, okay,
You.
flew him and my mother to New York City in a previous career celebration of success, right? And we walked into the Sheraton Hotel Center, and we ate the finest of food, stayed in the finest of rooms. His grandson, my son, right here in Anchorage, Alaska, and I want to make a point, that was at the Sheraton Center in New York City. My father's grandson, my son, was a manager at the Sheraton Hotel here in Anchorage, Alaska. Okay? Things are not perfect. We're striving for a more perfect union. But they are not what it used to be. Thank God Almighty.
Really, your turn.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh, no, that's okay. This is gonna probably be a little off the cuff, but I really appreciate your presentation and everything that you said, and I'd like to get your opinion on the idea of not all people here on Earth being of humankind, of being part of the oneness of the light, for instance, and having different entities, because we know that when we're above Earth, right, if we use quotations, there is no good and evil. It's all the one, it's all part of the love, and then down here on Earth is where we get that duality and that balance of what we perceive as good and evil. And so I just really wanted to know your opinion on that basis of the idea that not all people here are of the oneness of humankind.
Well, and this is my opinion.
Yes, no, please. I appreciate the way you gave your presentation.
And everybody
I like
got
your opinion.
an opinion, right?
Yeah, exactly. Everybody does. So, yeah.
Well, my opinion, ultimately, something created the absolute infinite all of the galaxies, all the universes, all the suns.
Right.
And in my mind, it has to be someone from somewhere, somehow. Bingo, we're part of it. Okay. Now, do we have different appearances and different behaviors? Yes. And we are evolving. That's my story.
All right.
That's what I
That's
believe.
true. So
All
I
right.
was just
Okay, but beyond the planet Earth, there's still this one creator. Okay.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
We've got time for more. I mean, everybody else just have something that strikes them, and we can kind of morph into an interesting little talking circle.
Also, and I might make some comments also about the importance of dreaming. Okay. And as you do know, our co-creative abilities is to dream, which means that we can use our imagination. And that's why we have this ideal of a more perfect union. We have an ideal of beloved community. And because we are, and I'm going to describe us as gods, godlings, it all begins with an idea. Then this idea goes into action, right, in some way or another. And that's why in our everyday, and that's why I like to break down to everyday living, we know that each one of us, in some way or another, have some gift of creativity. Some of you run businesses, some of you are creative parents, some of you are great cooks and literally artists, and wow, and play instruments that the vibration touches the soul, right? So But this is our bill. So this is the ideal. So what happens? We have to remember that for those of us who then want to support humanity to continue to evolve, is that we have to continue to hold the dream, hold the ideal of a more perfect union, hold the ideal, the dream, the imagery of a beloved community, and then take action based upon what we're called to do. Right? And we need what's called a spiritual economy. Right? We need a farmer, a baker, and a candlestick maker. Okay, so we're all not going to be doing the same thing. So so I know how important it is for because those of us who are social activists. Why isn't everybody involved in this? Right? But I love the story about Mahatma Gandhi, right? Because he was this great leader in poverty and etc. And of course, I'm sure you heard this story. His people who supported him says, "You have no idea how much wealth it takes to keep this man in poverty."
Yeah.
Okay, because everywhere you went, a great crowd followed.
Oh.
You got to have facilities, you got to have pre-planning, you got to have food, and that kind of stuff. And same with poor Mother Teresa, the same thing, right? Poor Mother Teresa, a multi-million-dollar operation, right?
Wow.
Right. So, but yes.
I have a question on the Masonry about how the founding fathers were all connected to Masonry.
Many.
My understanding of the Masons, that they started out, they built the castles, or they were extraordinarily good builders in the masonry, and then they had these codes that they used so that they would know. They're kind of like a union, that they knew that they were good at what they did, so that they could kind of like do jobs on the side, but so they didn't have to work at just one place. That was my understanding of the origins. And then when it became the Freemasonry, that's when other people joined that weren't actually Masons. And so have you ever done a deep dive on that to see how that origins took place and how they ended up influencing the founding fathers?
No, I'm not really a master of the history of that. Okay. But I have the general flavor of what happens to us all. Okay, when we come together with common skills, we become friends, right? And then we start exchanging information. And then what happens? It goes from the physical skill to the intellectual interaction, and then it goes from intellectual interaction now to what we call philosophical interaction. And so to me, it was just a natural intake when this happens in every culture and every little group that sticks together for a while, okay? You go from doing something very specific to now to building something etheric, okay? And to me, that's the general idea of my understanding of Freemasonry, right? Even though, of course, like many things that happens, there's many influence that happens. There's many influence that happens. It's a bowl of spaghetti, right? There's economics, money, there's government and power and influence. And we have some information now about enlightenment, but you don't want me to have it, so therefore you want to kill me because I have it, because if I have it, I'll find out that I'm a god like you are. Okay, so it's the whole thing about human evolution development is very complex. But that's my generic understanding of Freemasonry, generically speaking.
That's reminding me of our Adam, of where we're happening with Adam, is that we're trying to, we're together, we want to stay together, and what does that mean, and what are we going to become, and what are, just everything.
Right. And most religious, spiritual type organizations are going through this big challenge.
Okay.
Right? Even businesses, commercial business, going through this challenge. Something was happening pre-COVID, and COVID yanked us into a new world. We got blasted into this new world.
Yep.
I have a friend who's in the lower 48. He's a minister involved in a so-called mega church. He said they had over 2,000 members. And during COVID, it dwindled down to a couple hundred. And they're now back to a couple, maybe 400 or so. And it's so funny to me because we always say we want our philosophy of religion to get outside the walls. Well, it's outside the walls. Okay, where people are getting inspired by internet and all kind of other ways of getting inspiration and information. Okay? And the other questions that we're all asking us who have physical facilities, we're all asking, where do we go from here, right? In fact, there's another church, a big church building on Northern Lights building. They're having meetings like you are. They're saying, here we're all sitting up here bald-headed and gray. Okay, and there's only a few of us.
Where's the new people
Where,
coming
where,
in?
where do we go from here, right?
Yes.
And I think it's going to be like all technological advancements. We're going to look back in a period of time. We're going to say, wow, what a wonderful thing we have now. You know, because me being a buff of history and also in a study economics, you know, the time period when they're saying, oh my God, we will not have enough horses for transportation and ranching in our industry. Now we have hundreds of horsepower under our hoods out there in the parking lot. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Kaleem.